Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Horse's Mouth Live, the Extraordinary Advisor Show. My name is Ellen Rogan, and as always, I have fabulous guests who bring in incredible information to help you in every area of your life, especially your business. And I'm really excited and interested in today's topic, which is about how do you communicate with your clients where you're kind of speaking to their heads, but touching their hearts. So communication that actually works. And we have a neuroscience expert on today, Lynne Franklin. And I have known Lynne for many years. And I want to give you a little bit about her professional background, so you'll be as impressed as I am. She calls herself a neuroscience nerd, which I think is so super cute, but she's really great at translating how our brains work into practical, easy to use communication steps. She's a leadership communication mentor, trainer, speaker. She's the past president of the Illinois National Speakers Association. She's really, really good at what she does. Her TEDx talk on how to be a mind reader has over 4 million views, which is really incredible and not very common. I was looking up before we got on, like the average TED talk has 125,000 views. I'd kind of like to know what the mean is, but anyway, and that would be just to make me feel better about my TEDx talk because I don't have 125,000 views and certainly don't have 4 million views yet. Right. And Lynne's done a lot of work in our industry in terms of dealing with people in financial services and working for a financial services firm. So welcome, Lynne. I'm so excited that you're here.
I am so pumped to be here.
Yeah. So let's dig in. I know, why do we know, or why do you know through research that people make decisions emotionally rather than through logical reasoning? Like, we've heard this, but tell us a little bit more about that.
It's funny because my last name is Franklin, and Ben Franklin came up with the idea of, if you're going to make a decision, make a list of pros and cons, and then figure out what has the most, and then let that direct you. Well, guess what? I hate to say it, Uncle Ben, but you're full of crap. Because we make decisions emotionally. Our limbic system in our brain is the thing that lights up when we're making decisions. And it's also the emotional center of our brain. So it's where we choose if it's mad, sad, glad, hurt, and afraid, and all the permutations in between. And the reason that we know that we make our decisions there versus our higher thinking powers is because of studies where people have damaged limbic systems. So if I had a damaged limbic system and you held up a blue pen and a red pen and said, Lynne, pick a pen, I would not be able to do it. So that is how tied in our emotional brain is to making decisions. So we make decisions emotionally, and then we back and fill with our thinking brain. And we believe that what we're doing actually is we're rationalizing an emotional decision.
Yeah, that's interesting. It's reminding me a little bit of when I did training for my certification for mindfulness and emotional intelligence. I forgot about some of that research where they were talking about how important our emotions are in decision making, and that's really interesting because I think, especially in financial services, advisors tend to think like, oh no, you need to give your clients like the logical argument on rates of return or inflation, and that's what's going to be compelling. But that's not really the case, is it?
No, you're absolutely right. Because one of the most compelling things you can do is actually have people picture their futures. What would it look like if you were retired and you were able to do all the traveling and the setting the money aside for your kids and your grandkids, and having a house where it's warm in the wintertime as well as where it's warm in the summertime? Getting people to picture and imagine speaks to their emotional brain, and it helps them to decide make better decisions that will help them get to the things that they envision, as opposed to giving them all kinds of bullet points. Because here's the truth: when people see or hear bullet points, the only parts of their brain that light up are the two that recognize and interpret language. And guess what? They're in the thinking part of the brain, which is where people's resistance lives. So every time you speak in bullets and you show bullets to people, you're inviting them to resist your ideas.
Is that similar with charts? I remember years ago, I had seen a study from Fidelity that people don't even understand graphs and charts, and yet the whole financial services industry communicates that way. Is that something similar to what you're saying, Lynn?
It's similar, but not exact. So people will actually respond better to charts than bullet points. But once again, particularly in financial services, it's the story. Because what ends up happening is that when you tell me a good story, so I'm a neuroscience nerd and I study storytelling and brains. And what ends up happening is that when you tell me a good story, it's, different parts of my brain light up. So you ask me to imagine something, and so my visual cortex lights up. You tell me what I'm hearing, so my auditory cortex lights up. So it's all these different parts of my brain that light up. And at the same time, these are the parts of your brain that are lighting up too. So it's like our brains are in sync. And I am more likely to have a low resistance level because our brains are in sync. And I am more open to anything that you are going to suggest, because the activity in my brain is connected to the activity in your brain. We're connected on a micro level.
That's fascinating. Does it matter if I'm telling you my story or telling you a story that happened with another client, or you're telling me your story in terms of building that connection?
And the answer is no. If it's your story and it's a compelling story, or if it's a client story that's similar to mine, you can say to me, I worked with a client who had the same goals as you did. And what ends up happening in my brain is I'm thinking, oh, I want to hear what's going on with this similar client. Because it's a line I've used forever. And back in the days when I used to be primarily a writer, I would talk about websites and I would say, no one comes to your website to learn about you. They come to see themselves. And if you can show them that you already know all the information that they need to know, and you've helped somebody with a similar problem, you reduce their perceived risk in working with you and shorten the amount of time it takes for them to reach out. So what that means is that you tell me a story about a client like me, it lowers my resistance because I now have more trust that you've already solved my problem and you're not going to be learning on me.
Do people also remember things better when there's a story? I mean, I know when I've done speaking engagements and then run into somebody years later who saw me speak, they'll say, oh, I remember that story about whatever, your son crashing the car into the garage. Or sometimes they'll remember stories I don't even remember that I ever told and almost don't even remember happened to me. And I know when I was seeing clients, people would start a sentence like, I remember when you told me. And I was always like, oh my God, what did I tell them? I hope it worked out. It was usually good if they remembered it. But how does that work in terms of like our memories or really building those connections in a longer term way?
Well, the truth is that we are wired for stories. Our brains are. Because back in the old days when we were in the cave, in the caves or in the jungle, storytelling was the way that we passed on information. So what, 600,000 years ago? Storytelling was the only way we learned. And then about 100,000 years ago, we started sharing stories in cave paintings. And written language is only about 3,000 years old. And then about 30, 40 years ago, PowerPoint came and thus ended the great progression of communication. But our brains are wired for stories because we've been doing this forever as human beings. So you're right. You tell me a good story and it speaks to my emotional brain where I make decisions. It's memorable for me. And you're right, it's the best way to share information. I say stories are like a Trojan horse. They slip past the resistance in the thinking brain and speak right to the emotional brain. And that's where people make decisions. So you're absolutely right. People remember your stories when they're good.
That's great. That's really great, Lynn. In the, especially now that so much is happening over videos, and we've got, these all over the place, our phones. And, if you look around my office, it looks like I'm, running a service center for technology. I've got all these screens, and it's so easy to get distracted. So if I'm in a meeting with somebody and I am being really present and notice their attention wandering, what are some ways that I can bring them back right here?
And the best way is to ask them a story about themselves or to share some information about who they are and to listen well. Because I believe most of us wander around feeling chronically unseen and unheard. And when somebody asks us a question and is genuinely interested in our answer, it's like catnip to all of us. And so, and especially as financial advisors, there are so many things that you want to know about people that you need to know in order to send them to the right place to consider what they want for their future. So this stuff just comes as second nature to you. So if you see somebody's attention wandering off, stop what you're doing and ask them a question that's related to things that you're talking about, or even something totally off the wall. It could be that suddenly you look past them and you see a picture that they have on their wall or a greeting card that they have sitting there. And then say, I've just been noticing this about the picture that you have or the card that I see there. Tell me a little bit about that. I'm interested. And to say that you're interested lets them know you really do care. And then for most people in the world, whether or not it's a screen or in person, give them eye contact. Because most of the people in the world, 80% of the people in the world value eye contact. Which means that if you're on a screen, you got to be looking at the camera and not at their picture or your picture. But one of the tips I give people on screen stuff is call out the elephant in the room. Say to them, whenever I'm speaking to you, I'm going to be looking right at the camera because I want you to know I'm talking directly to you. But whenever you're speaking, I'm going to be looking at your picture on my screen. So you know that I'm picking up all of the other nuances of the things that are going on around you and the things that you're saying because I really care. But in the moment, it will look like I'm not looking directly at you, but I'm actually paying more attention to you. And then people don't mind that you're not giving them eye contact all of the time when they know that you're actually looking at their picture on the screen. It just makes things easier for people.
I haven't heard that advice before. And I've, in the last, since we all started doing so much more video, I've had guests on and done trainings. And I really like that idea of kind of as ising it. Like, okay, this is what's going on. Because, I think that's terrific. And I think that will make people feel, and just the fact that not only are you explaining it, but as you said, you're explaining in a way that they know that you're truly interested in them. So what are some other ways that we can get communication across in effective ways that are in alignment with how people's brains work?
One of my personal favorites is, I call it the rule of 3, which is that people can only hold 3 ideas in their short-term memory without getting full. Because it's pretty common for us, particularly as financial consultants, to have the 5 or 10 things we really want to get through in a meeting. And so we go in there with our list of things that we want to share with people or the things we want them to decide on. And here's my line about it. By the time you get to number 4, chances are pretty good they've lost number 1 and you're probably standing in number 2. What this means is that it's better to have a series of shorter meetings than one long meeting where you're trying to cram everything through them. What this forces us to do as consultants too, which is also great, is that we have to prioritize things. So what are the three most important ideas we want to talk about at this particular session? Where do we want people to make their decisions? And we cut out the stuff we don't need to really cover at that session, which means that, because here's the line I love to hate. People say, it's like drinking from a fire hose. Like, it's a great idea. And it's not. People just feel overwhelmed. And the line I've heard about it that I like is, a confused mind says no. So know that people can only hold three ideas in their short-term memory, and then they're full. So focus on what are the three most important things that they should know and that you should cover in this session. And don't try to jam too much down their throats.
There's so much I love about that. First of all, it's forcing the advisor to be super deliberate and intentional about what's going to happen at the meeting. I can't say when I was meeting with clients that I ever thought of the three things I wanted to get through. I might think about how I wanted the meeting to feel or go or some other helpful things, but it's whether you have a written agenda or not, you have a mental agenda of the things that you know are really going to serve them. And I'm sure, I don't know, I haven't heard you say this, but I suspect when you're working with speakers that this is an important thing too. And a lot of advisors give workshops and there's so much they want to share and they're like throwing up practically all this technical information. And so just to go back to your point about stories, how important that is, but would you say that's also important when maybe they're doing a group meeting for clients or prospects to be focusing on a smaller number of topics?
Absolutely. Because now people can only hold three ideas in their short-term memory. Here are a couple of other things when we're talking about meetings or presentations that I found really useful. The next one is the rule of 7, which is that people can only sit and listen to a talking head for 7 minutes without taking a brain vacation. So what this means for you as a presenter, either in a meeting or in a program, is that every 7 minutes you need to do, and the jargon for this is a state change. You need to change the level of energy in the room. So for example, a state change could be asking everybody to raise their hand. So everybody who's listening, raise your hand. Okay. Or ask them to imagine something, or ask them to type something in the chat, or put them in a breakout room where they can talk about things to other people, or ask them what questions they have so that you can answer their questions. So every 7 minutes, you need to give people an opportunity to interact with you or with themselves or with others, because otherwise their brains take a vacation and they leave the room. Body's there, brain is gone. You want to be talking to their brains.
Yeah, I know you probably have seen this research, but it said that 47% of the time we're thinking about something other than what is happening right now. So that means almost half the time, either you're not paying attention, but people, no matter how fascinating you think you are probably not paying attention almost half the time. Is that 7 minutes the same whether you're in person with people or on video, or is that a different stat if you're live in a room with people?
And at this point, the research indicates it's the same either way, but the scoop is always be looking for ways to interact with people. And the more you do it, the more engaged they stay. Because you're right, when they're in a room with you, you can tell who's there and who isn't. On video, not as easy, because you can't necessarily see everybody all the time. So always have something for people to be thinking about or doing, or those state changes. 7 minutes, it's the longest amount of time people can go without being engaged if you want to hang on to them.
Yeah, no, I think that's so great. Yeah, and especially as I was saying before, I think this is something for everyone listening to remember when you're, if you're doing a Social Security workshop or Medicare or something that's a little bit more technical, there is this feeling of like, oh, I have to give them all this stuff. And, you know, it's hard. And it's also hard, Lynn, I know you know this because you're a presenter. I've done a bunch of workshops where it's not like Zoom meetings where I can't even see people. And I've done some recently where there isn't even the chat available because some of the financial services firms have such restrictions. It's really, really hard. So I think that even becomes more important to make sure that you're asking them to do something or think about something or stand up or whatever it is that you can do. That's really great advice. Is that the same if you're across the table from somebody?
Yes. Yeah. However you can get people engaged is important. And I want to add one other rule, which I think is really useful too. And it's called the rule of 20, which is that people can only, in their short-term memory, so we're talking about the hippocampus, they can only hold on to 3 ideas, but they can only hold on to about 20 minutes of content before their short-term memory is full. And once again, it's that, oh, let's drink from the fire hose. No, don't do it. So 20 minutes of information, and then their short-term memory is full. What you need to do at that point is give them an opportunity to ask you questions or somehow incorporate that information so they make it their own, and then they move it from their short-term memory into their long-term memory. So now they have bandwidth for the next thing that you want to share. So the days of having a meeting where you talk for an hour and you're sitting across from somebody in screen or in person, don't do it. It's so counterproductive. And once again, the confused mind says no.
So what would be, I understand if you ask them kind of a question, but if you're having them repeat back, can you give us a prompt to help them move something from short-term to long-term memory?
And you can say the main point that we've just talked about is Medicare and how to make smart choices on Medicare. And I know I shared a couple of ideas with you. What's the one that really struck you the most? What's the one that you thought, yeah, I need to do something about that? Or what's the one that's most confusing? So, because you can take a look at their facial expressions and see if they're tracking you. And if you're getting the deer in the headlights look, you can say, I shared a lot of information with you. But so let's just kind of break it down. What do you find most confusing about this? Or, what is it that you want to do next about this? So get them to talk about and relate the information that you've shared to their experience or their situation. And once they've done that, they've cleared out that space in their short-term memory, which means that now they can do something else with it.
That's great. And Lynn, I imagine you did this deliberately, but I noticed earlier before you were talking about this, you said you could ask someone, what questions do you have for me? Which I really like versus saying, do you have any questions for me? Because then
you're absolutely right.
First of all, I think it makes it open and you just wait. What questions do you have for me? Because there's this, what I've seen people do is say, do you have any questions for me? And it could have some inference or even an energy of like, okay, let's move on. But if it's what questions do you have for me, it opens the space that of course they're going to have questions and you make it okay for them to ask.
That's perfectly true. And the other thing you can do if you ever encounter a situation where they have questions, but they have some resistance about asking you those questions, it could be they're afraid of looking stupid or they're confused and they don't want to let you know that. You can say, a lot of people in your situation will ask me this question and then share that question. Or a lot of people have questions about this. So you give them the prompt. And that kind of gets them off the hook. It lets them know that, it gets them a chance to react to something rather than come up with something, which is easier for all of us. And especially if you're letting them know that other people have questions about this, it makes it safer for them to have questions too.
That's great. So, Lynn, what is one thing that advisors can do to connect even more deeply with clients or prospects?
We were talking about it a little bit earlier, so let's pull everything back together. And I'm going to give you two things. The first thing is tell a good story about someone who is similar to them, whom you've helped. And I call it the reverse testimonial because most people think about testimonials as, oh, it's happy talk. Hey, it was so wonderful to work with Ellen, which tells people nothing. So to be able to come at the story from, I was working with somebody who had a problem similar to yours, and that problem was, and explain what it was. And then and this was what I recommended, and they weren't quite sure this was the right thing for them. But they did it anyway, and here are the results. And here's the life they're living now. So you tell them a story that relates to who they are and the things that they have concerned about. And you let them know that, hey, other people who aren't pushovers have done this and things came out well for them. So that pulls them along in that story. And the second thing you can do is ask good questions and listen. And there are two types of listening. The first is the most common, and it's called listening to respond, where you listen to whatever it is that they're saying and you start thinking about what you're going to say next when they stop. The second and the better kind of listening is listening for understanding and empathy, where it's clear you're giving them your full attention. You're not just listening to the words that they're saying, but you're also listening for the situation and the context. And once again, because we don't get a whole lot of that, we get more listening to respond, and we also get the, hey, I can't wait until she shuts up so that I can tell something. Listening for understanding and empathy, it truly creates a great connection for you.
Beautiful. Thank you, Lynn. This is so great. Really actionable ideas that advisors can put into use right away. I'm grateful for this reminder, or maybe it's new information for you to tell more stories, listen in a way to really hear with empathy what's going on for someone. Really great. And then the 20 minutes of short-term memory, I never knew that before, and that people can only hold three things at once. So thank you, thank you, thank you. Lynn, if people want to learn more about you, whether they're looking for someone to help coach them or consult with their firm, or I think we're getting back to in-person meetings, but even if they're virtual meetings, your information is great for offices and financial services firms. Where should they go?
I've made it about as easy as it can be. It's lynnefranklin.com. There you'll also find good videos there with additional information. Stuff is free. I say start with the free stuff and learn things. And then it's true in the financial profession as well. Nothing happens until there's a conversation. So feel free to call me or reach out, and I promise you, I'll be a good listener, and this will be the most fun you have all day.
Perfect. Thank you. And for those bad spellers out there like me, it's Lynn with an E, Franklin. And Lynn, get on her mailing list. I am on. The idea for the show came because I actually read Lynn's emails, and she really provides great information. And so, Lynn, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm really honored and grateful for all the terrific information that you've shared.
Hey, it's been a pleasure. And by the way, one final thing, we shared a lot of stuff today. Pick the one thing you're going to do in the course of the next week because you were here today. Because here's the truth. Neuroscience says you'll forget 80% of what we talked about within a week. But if you pick one thing and take action on it, you can start changing your life. And Ellen sure knows about that.
Well, thank you. And I'm going to take that advice, because what I want to do now is mention for the people watching and listening that we have an Extraordinary Advisor Masterclass starting on Thursday. So there is still time to get in. And if you are interested in increasing your impact in the world and in your business, your influence, how you're connecting with people, and of course your income, then you want to be there with us. And to tell a quick story, one of our attendees in the last session just told me, I saw her last week and she was actually speaking at a conference I was speaking at, talking about her experience in the masterclass. In the last 90 days has grown her assets under management by 40%. Like, I cannot promise that. However, incredible income results, but she also says it's changed everything else in her life. She has a special needs child. She said her days just start with so much more energy and clarity, and everything is easier in her life. So if you are looking for that to go from really sometimes feeling overwhelmed and burnt out and maybe a little less than excited about the industry to increase how your results, please join us. You can learn more at horsesmouth.com/masterclass. So I would love to see you there. And thank you as always for watching and listening. If you have any questions or feedback, please reach out to me. You can find me on all the social media at ellenrogan.com, and there's more about me at ellenrogan.com. And my question for you today is, how big of an impact are you willing to make? And remember,